able to attend. Great. So, oh, and if you are not currently muted, could I just ask you to put your audio on mute, please? Thank you. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you all for coming and welcome to tonight's session on the movement to sue big oil. My name is David Ravensbergen. I recently joined the Council of Canadians as the Pacific Regional Organizer. As many or most of you know, the Council of Canadians is a national membership organization that brings people together to challenge corporate power, strengthen democracy, and safeguard the commons. I'm privileged to be working with people across BC and the Yukon, where I was recently, on grassroots campaigns like the one that we're going to be talking about tonight. So I saw from our sign-up sheet that we've got folks that are coming from council chapters in places like Kelowna, Nelson, Victoria. I've seen folks in here from Campbell River and Powell River as well. Welcome, everyone. We also have people who are from places where we don't currently have Council of Canadians chapters, particularly Vancouver. And if you are in Vancouver, that is an issue that I am aiming to address during my tenure as Pacific Organizer. So I will most likely be reaching out to you very soon. So whether you're a dedicated chapter activist or you've just been introduced to the Council, I hope tonight's webinar will inspire you to get involved with the cause of making oil and gas companies use their enormous profits to pay for real climate action. The Subic Oil campaign that we'll be talking about tonight launched on June 15th of this year, and the campaign has already scored a pretty major victory. The City of Vancouver has voted to set aside $1 for every resident toward the cost of working with other local governments to bring a joint class action lawsuit against global fossil fuel companies for their climate impacts. So Vancouver has shown us that it can be done, and now it's up to the rest of us to push other local governments to follow suit. So we are privileged tonight to have two speakers. We have Andrew Gage and Dana Taylor. I'll be introducing them both briefly, and then I'll give a short overview of the order of events for the evening, and then we'll get started. So I'll start with Andrew. Andrew Gage was an environmental activist before he was an environmental lawyer. He was accepted into law school shortly after being arrested for protesting logging in Clayoquot Sound on Vancouver Island's west coast. During law school, Andrew helped found the University of Victoria's Environmental Law Center and volunteered with the noted Indian environmental lawyer, M.C. Mehta. Andrew is currently the project lead for West Coast Environmental Law's climate change program. Under his direction, the program has focused on the legal and professional consequences to industry, government, and professionals of failing to address climate change. In addition to his climate work, Andrew is lead author for the Environmental Law Alert blog and has published a series of cutting-edge academic papers on the rights of the public to a healthy natural environment. Dana Taylor is a community organizer at the Georgia Strait Alliance. She's worked as a community organizer since 2015, and she's passionate about placing decolonization at the center of her environmental activism. Before joining the Georgia Strait Alliance, Dana was with the Force of Nature Alliance, where she worked with municipalities across Metro Vancouver to adopt the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change Targets, IPCC, and to create practical steps to reduce emissions at the local level. During the 2019 federal election, Dana was part of 100 Debates on the Environment, a project that organized more than 100 debates across the country, positioning the environment as an issue that no party or candidate could ignore. So I'm really grateful to both Andrew and Dana for joining us this evening. So the order of events will be, we'll start with Andrew, who will give us an introduction to the Subic Oil campaign. Then Dana will follow with a discussion of some campaign messaging strategies. We'll have a short break during Dana's section, followed by an activity designed to hone your messaging skills as applied to this campaign. And then we'll finish the evening with Andrew, who will offer us some concrete suggestions for ways that Council of Canadians activists and allies can work to advance the campaign in their own communities. So that's it from me, and I will hand it over to you, Andrew.
Thank you very much, David. I'm delighted to see you all just coming out to hear about the campaign, and I'm going to share my screen a second. Can I get a thumbs up that people can see that? See my screen now? Yeah, okay, great. I'm joining you from the territory of Lekwungen speaking people on southern Vancouver Island, and I am a staff lawyer, as David said, with West Coast Environmental Law. My pronouns are he, him. And
sorry, Andrew, could I just, Ron, who just joined, could I ask you to mute your microphone, please?
I can mute it. There we go. Oh, okay. Yeah. As David said, the Subic Oil campaign is just a couple of months old. And some of you may have seen a version of this presentation. However, I'll run through it quickly to try to make sure we're all at the, have the same understanding of the campaign and where we're going. As David said, our agenda for the day is a bit about the campaign, a bit with Dana about messaging around Subic Oil, and then more of an exploration about inviting you to explore and envision what your chapters might do on the campaign, should you decide to do that. In terms of the case for Subic Oil, I generally speak about this in terms of the problem, the solution that Subic Oil points to, and what we're hoping to get out of that. And so I'll just quickly run through that. The problem, I think, ultimately is the impacts of climate change. These are massive costs, human costs and financial costs that communities around British Columbia, around the world, are experiencing. And I think we haven't yet to really wrap our collective heads as a society around just how bad those costs could get. And it's not just the heat waves, the floods, the fires. It's also the costs of preparing for those types of impacts. The city of Vancouver itself faces about $1 billion in costs related to rising sea levels. Abbotsford is talking about similar figures. Most of the lower mainland municipalities have figures that are in that range. And certainly communities around the province also have, if not billions, and certainly hundreds of millions of dollars in costs, and often have a smaller tax base from which to cover those revenues. The Insurance Bureau of Canada and the Federation of Canadian Municipalities put out this report in 2020, estimating that collectively Canadian local governments should be spending about $5.3 billion each year to prepare for the impacts of climate change. Those costs are necessary to keep us safe from the types of impacts we've seen over the last year and other impacts. And if we don't spend those types of huge sums, we're actually facing even worse consequences. Again, this is something that no level of government has really come to grips with, and the costs, both human and financial, are staggering. And the thing is, we've known for a long time that climate change was going to give rise to these types of costs. This is Dr. Edward Teller, a noted American physicist, who was asked in 1959 to speak to the American Petroleum Institute conference that was being organized. He was speaking on the future of energy. And he said at that time, whenever you burn conventional fuel, you create carbon dioxide, contributing to a greenhouse effect. The temperature rise corresponding to a 10% increase in carbon dioxide will be sufficient to melt the ice cap and submerge New York. All the coastal cities would be covered. And his warning, that was in 1959 that he gave that warning. 10 years later, the American Petroleum Institute had a comprehensive study from the Stanford Research Institute, giving similarly stark warnings about climate change. There were a series of warnings through the following decades. Certainly by 1988, Shell and Exxon had detailed reports from their scientists that not only confirmed that the science of climate change was established and settled, but also gave detailed estimates of the types of impact or predictions of the types of impacts that it would cause. The heat waves, the wildfires, the floods, sea level rise were all spelled out in some detail by the scientists working for these companies. Now, in 1992, the world's governments came together and signed the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which promised to stabilize concentrations of greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere at a level which would avoid dangerous atmospheric interference, dangerous interference with the atmosphere. And as you can see from the graph, the rest of the graph, that did not occur. There was an initial dropping off. There was a lot of optimism that they would be able to turn things around. Now, keep in mind that the oil and gas industry at this point actually had patents on solar technologies. They had patents on low emission vehicles. They had a number of solutions that could have helped make that transition. But in 1998, and thereabouts, there were a series of campaigns, but in 1998, a campaign launched by the American Petroleum Institute, Chevron, and Exxon, and a number of other companies had a whole communications plan designed to discredit climate science. And it said that victory would be achieved when ordinary members of the public understood that to argue for climate action on the basis of science was to be out of touch with reality. And in no small part due to those efforts, as well as lobbying governments, as well as not developing the alternatives that they had the patents to, the emissions continued to rise. Now, it's easy to sort of say, oh, there's this awful industry. But in fact, I think that the industry was responding to a very structural problem that society set up, that we actually almost entirely separate. We generally view the benefits of the fossil fuel economy, the profits that these companies make, that their investors make, that governments make, and that society makes from the fossil fuel economy. We keep it almost entirely separate from the question of what are the costs of the fossil fuel economy, and especially of climate change, and how are we going to pay for them? And as a result, the entire fossil fuel economy appears to be hugely profitable. It's not actually profitable because when you consider the full cost of it, but it looks like it's hugely profitable. And that affects, in that context, the decisions made by the oil and gas industry, I think, are, if not defensible, at least understandable. And what we need to do, and really which the climate movement has never done, is to actually bring together those costs and benefits and insist that the people who profit most from the oil and gas industry should be the people who actually pay the most for paying those costs. Now, I don't think we can say that they necessarily will pay everything. In fact, I think that there are good reasons to say that they should pay their fair share. But the goal is to make sure that these costs show up on their balance sheets, because right now they don't. And so they continue to make poor decisions. And it's not just the fossil fuel companies. Investors continue to invest in fossil fuels because they look profitable. Governments continue to fund climate solutions that don't actually solve the problem, but which appear to be action. And as long as we have this separation of the costs and this expectation that we, the public, will pay, and that's okay, we're going to continue to have approvals of oil and gas projects. We're going to continue to have commitments to climate action that end up being watered down in order to allow this industry to continue. So the solution, I think, is that we ultimately want there to be a broad social consensus, and not just the social consensus, but the consequences of that these global fossil fuel companies will need to pay their fair share. Because then those costs start showing up on their balance sheets, and that affects how decisions are made, again, not just by them, but by society at large. So the Subic Oil campaign is broadly about changing how British Columbians view the profitability and responsibility of the fossil fuel industry and their role in causing climate change. And it'll be successful when the conventional wisdom is that these companies must and will pay their fair share of the cost of climate change. Now, a key piece of that, obviously, is the class action lawsuit that the campaign advocates for. But I want to emphasize that the goal is much broader than that. The class action is a key tool, but ultimately we're looking to progressive people, to people concerned about climate change, to actually drive the broader conversation that needs to be behind and supporting the possibility of a class action lawsuit. I do want to talk a bit about the class action lawsuit because people sometimes are like, oh, that's pretty specific. And that's intentional. We wanted to make something that would actually, could be done under existing laws that would allow us to make this point about the profitability of the industry, the responsibility of the industry. So we're proposing a class action lawsuit brought by local governments for their costs of preparing for climate change, the adaptation costs, because those costs are very directly tied to climate change. The seawalls that Vancouver has to build are actually going to need to be higher as a result of climate change. The storm drains that your communities need to have to deal with extreme weather and flooding have to be larger and designed differently as a result of climate change. And each of those additional costs can be tied very directly to climate change. For those who are legally inclined, we suggest that we brought in nuisance. Specifically, public nuisance is a lawsuit brought on behalf of or in relation to the compromising of a public right or a public interest. In this case, in respect to the atmosphere. And against fossil fuel companies for their fair share, for a proportionate share, based on their contribution to the problem. Now, this type of lawsuit is legally possible. The Friends of the Earth Netherlands successfully sued Shell. It wasn't for damages, but it was a case that confirmed that Shell was legally responsible for the emissions that their products cause. And as a result, Shell was ordered to reduce its emissions. That's currently under appeal, but it still stands as an important precedent for what we're trying to do here. But also we have 28 law professors from across Canada who have signed a letter that was sent to local governments, an open letter to local governments, saying that this type of litigation is possible under Canadian law. And there are over, I think now almost a couple dozen lawsuits in the US filed by local governments and in some cases state governments against fossil fuel companies. This is similar to what happened with asbestos and tobacco and opioids and any number of other manufactured products that gave rise to harm, where the companies knew that their products were causing those types of harm. I will say it becomes even easier if we've seen that change in public opinion that I was talking about earlier, because if the judges come to court aware that the broad segments of Canadian society expect these companies to be held liable, that makes it easier for them to do their job. It's global in nature. Whereas most of what we do on climate change is about reducing Canada's greenhouse gas emissions, or maybe BC's greenhouse gas emissions, or maybe your local government, your community's greenhouse gas emissions, we are able to sue global fossil fuel companies for their global emissions in BC courts because the harm is occurring in BC. And this gets us out of the usual problem where each country's finger pointing and saying, oh, well, Canada's emissions are only 1.6% of global emissions. Chevron's emissions are about 3.2% of global emissions in terms of their historic contribution to the problem from their direct operations on the products. Exxon's are a similar amount, Shell's are a similar amount. So the top five or so companies are responsible for about 14% of human-caused greenhouse gas emissions. And it's financially manageable. By bringing this case as a class action lawsuit, that means local governments are collaborating together and sharing some of the costs and the risks associated with this. BC's class action legislation actually protects the parties from having to pay legal fees if they lose. It also means that they can each put in some money and work together. And we're proposing that at the initial stage of the class action, where that each municipality just put in $1 per resident, which is what Vancouver has agreed to do. And I will say that also that there's obviously the symbolic value of everyone working together in that way as well, bringing this on behalf of all of BC local governments. And finally, it's popular. We've actually polled about this, and we just had 2 questions in an omnibus survey by Stratcom. We asked this question, and we got 68.5% actually, I think is the figure is rounded in the graph, either strongly support or somewhat support their local governments working together to sue the world's most polluting oil companies to make them pay a share of climate costs. Now, I will highlight this term, a share. We know from our work that it is very important. That there's a large group of the public that don't think that the company should be wholly responsible, and nor are we really saying that they will be. But they will, if you're not careful, they will assume you're saying, oh, the company should pay everything, taxpayers and our community should pay nothing. That doesn't poll nearly as well. And also, from a legal point of view, it's actually way more challenging to say that the companies should be responsible for 100% of costs. Right now, taxpayers are responsible for 100% of costs. This industry is paying nothing towards the costs associated with their products. So it's very important that we talk about this in terms of making sure that the industry does not get off the hook and actually takes responsibility so that some of these costs appear on their balance sheets. So what do we hope to get out of this? I mean, broadly, we hope to change how business decisions about climate change are made. Because we've seen what happens when they don't, when climate change isn't included in the business decisions. Before we even get to litigation, we are treating climate impacts as serious enough to deserve litigation. And we're talking about the real human and financial costs to our local communities. We are hoping that public calls for litigation will shift, and shifting attitudes about that corporate responsibility will change behavior, business decisions, corporate investor and government decisions. And we also know from some of our message testing that talking about climate lawsuits and corporate liability appears to increase support for other types of climate action. And finally, we're directly highlighting that the oil and gas industry is responsible for climate change. We've seen this already. The fact that Vancouver passed that motion for $1 per resident resulted in coverage in the New York Times. Which, I mean, okay, I don't want to go, New York Times, how wonderful, I mean, the hope is that some of the people reading the New York Times are the investors in this industry. And it certainly begins the conversation of how does North American society, how does global society deal with the potential liabilities associated with this industry that our governments continue to believe is a moneymaker. Once the lawsuit's filed, the very first stage in a class action lawsuit is for a judge to confirm that the case should be heard as a class action. And what that means is that one of the things that they will rule on is whether the case has merit. And that's great because that means right at the beginning, we get a ruling on whether or not this case could be won by the municipalities. And if it can't, if the judge rules it can't, and that's appealed up to the Supreme Court of Canada, then we know where we stand at least. And we can look at other options. We can look at legislation to change those rules. But if, as we believe will be the case, the judge rules that the case has merit, that it should go ahead, then those companies immediately need to disclose to their shareholders that a judge has ruled that they could lose this. That ruling also, I think, sets the stage for conversations about whether the industry is acting responsibly and continuing to expand and continuing to produce oil and gas when they are liable for it. It affects investors, again, and governments. We believe companies have already taken steps to try and demonstrate that they're acting responsibly by distancing themselves from climate denial organizations as a result of litigation that's been launched. But it's something that we hope to see more as the lawsuits progress and as this lawsuit progresses, is companies actually taking steps so that they can tell a court we're acting responsibly and so they can convince the public that they're acting responsibly. And governments and investors hopefully see climate litigation as a risk that they have to consider and are one that favors transition away from fossil fuels. Theoretically, in a class action, this would also be the point where you could see a settlement. That's going to be a harder sell given how much the oil and gas industry has invested in this, but it's not beyond the realm of possibility either. And the benefits when we win is fossil fuel companies will be ordered to pay a fair share of the cost of climate change, which means it's showing up on their balance sheet. It means local governments get needed resources for climate adaptation. And it means that the public will have a judge ruling that the fossil fuel industry is responsible for its share in causing climate change. It's a court precedent that could be replicated elsewhere, and it will increase pressure for better international climate treaties, because right now, until now, the oil and gas industry has actually had an incentive to stand in the way of those treaties. If they are going to be liable and on the hook for a share, they will finally have a financial reason to support the climate treaties. So we're going to come back to the join us thing in more detail in terms of what your chapters might actually do towards the end of this call. I will just highlight some of the things that are on the website for the general public and for individuals and for all of you. First of all, there is the Subic Oil Declaration, which we are encouraging everyone and anyone to sign. It basically calls, it's a longer document, but the sort of action-oriented part of it is calling on local governments to generally take climate action, but also to set aside $1 per resident towards the cost of suing fossil fuel companies, and then to work with other local governments to file that class action lawsuit. This is a key document for us. It's one that allows us to communicate with people who support the general idea of the class action lawsuit and build a constituency that is actively calling on their local governments to bring this type of action. And it is something that we very much want to see individuals signing up to. You can also sign on, and the Council of Canadians has signed on as an endorser. I don't think there's any reason that local chapters couldn't also choose to do so if they were interested in doing so. And endorsers just mean that they support the campaign. It doesn't necessarily commit to any particular action. Partners, shown on the right, are the groups that are very indicated interest in being more actively engaged and actually building something new with us. And so, Georgia Strait Alliance is on there. We'll talk a little later about Shake Up the Establishment. But that's what we'll talk about more, I think, later in the presentation is what what could you do as a partner in terms of playing a more active role. There's also a lot of resources on the website, from social media memes that can be shared to posters that can be downloaded to Subic Oil stickers that can be ordered from us. You can also order t-shirts. There's also background documents in terms of providing more information on what the lawsuit looks like, how to talk about it. And those resources are all there. And as I say, the website, I think, is more targeted to individuals, and we'll explore a little further after Dana's section on what individual chapters might look like taking on as a community group, as a chapter. So I'll pause there for questions for the sort of basic concept of the campaign. As I say, we will be coming back later to what can you actually do if you are interested in being part of the campaign. But I'll pause here for questions and clarification on what I've presented so far. And then we can turn things over to Dana to talk a bit about how you talk about Subic Oil and maybe how some of these messages could come up in your existing campaigns or in new campaigns. So if anyone has any questions, I'll stop sharing there for the moment. So there's a question on the group Parents for Climate, which is one of the groups that's endorsed the campaign. I'm afraid I don't actually have a ton of bio on about to sign up on, and we're included. I don't have a lot more to offer there. I'm getting a message that my internet connection's unstable, so if I start breaking up, please let me know. Okay, so this is an excellent presentation. Will be available for reuse, posting, etc. I mean, as David mentioned, we're recording the presentation, so I think the intention is to make it available in that form. If someone has a desire to use the PowerPoint themselves, we are talking to other groups about making a version available and training people in its use, and we can certainly talk about that. Barbara asks, how long would this process take to go through the courts? That's a great question, and it's uncertain, I think, is the answer. One of the reasons that we emphasize the benefits you get early on in the process is because we know that the day one when you file it, and certainly by the time the judge a year or so in maybe has made a ruling on the merits of the case, we're getting huge benefits from the point of view of the climate movement. The actual time to see sort of a payment of damages, that would be longer. The opioid litigation that was filed just a few years ago by the BC government has already been settled. So if you can get a settlement, it's faster. Conversely, the tobacco litigation, is still in the courts, but I think that the government hasn't been pursuing it as quickly as they could. Class action lawsuits typically would take more in the 3 to 5 year range. Given the complexity of this case, and it'll be fought tooth and nail by the industry, it could certainly be longer than that. So there's a question about could you join at a 50 cents per resident? I mean, I'd be interested in your feedback on that. We've definitely thought that $1 per resident would allow municipalities of all sizes to join on the grounds that it's on a per person basis. And in many cases, the sort of smaller communities in terms of population have more of a problem in terms of figuring out how to deal with the costs. So my inclination is to say, no, we want $1 per resident in terms of we need to keep everyone on the same footing. That being said, every municipality in BC is potentially covered by the lawsuit, whether they pay in or not. So if they want to make a contribution and it's less than what we've asked for, that I can't imagine the municipalities that are putting in $1 per resident are going to say no. And then secondly, there's nothing stopping you from phasing that $1 per resident in over a year or two. So if 50 cents per resident for 2 years is more palatable, that I don't think there's any concern about that. Thank you, Dana, for putting in the link to the website for Parents for Climate. Have I missed anyone's question? Feel free also to raise your hand and unmute yourself if that's easier.
Andrew, I just wanted to jump in on Barbara's question above about how long the process would take to go through the courts. I'm wondering if there's a goal for when the lawsuit will be filed.
Yeah, I mean, we would certainly prefer sooner rather than later, like within the next year would be wonderful. Whether that's realistic or not, we'll have to see in terms of how quickly we can get other local governments to sign on and how much enthusiasm Vancouver and those municipalities have for it. The only specific timeline is that if one of the options is that there could be a claim included in the lawsuit for damages related to the heat dome, or for that matter, due to the flooding, that'd be a separate class, and there's some complexity to that. But the heat dome was 150 times more likely due to climate change than without, according to scientists. So there are specific costs that communities had there. That could be included as part of the class action, in which case it would have to be filed within 2 years of the heat dome. So that's the only sort of hard timeline in terms of that. The costs for adaptation are more straightforward because they're an ongoing cost. There's a question about how municipalities would be needed. So, I mean, as a matter of law, there's no minimum number to bring a class action, but the judge has to be persuaded that there is an actual class here. And that if the class action doesn't go ahead, there's the potential that there would be multiple cases. So the more municipalities that sign on, both help with the budget, and I mean, the cost even for certification of the class action could be in the sort of $1 million or more dollar range. So we've in our own minds are shooting for a 1 million resident commitment. Vancouver's got over 600,000, so that gets a significant portion of the way there. But more municipalities, and even including smaller municipalities signing on, do demonstrate to the court that there is a broad interest in the case going ahead as a class action. All right, I'm going to pause there just because I don't want to run out of time at the end and turn things over to Dana. Thank you very much for the questions. And if there are more questions at the end, we can certainly continue. Yeah, and for that matter, I could stay on a little longer if there were questions that weren't answered during the time we have.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. I'm just going to share my screen. So as David said at the beginning, I'm Dana Taylor. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm calling from the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations territory. I'm a community organizer with Georgia Strait Alliance. We're a regional environmental charity that works to protect the Salish Sea and the surrounding communities, and we're a partner with WCL on the Subic Oil project. So you've had a chance to hear a bit from Andrew about the Subic Oil campaign, as well as to ask a few questions, and there'll be more opportunities to ask questions as we go along tonight. But I wanted to talk a little bit about messaging. The Subic Oil campaign has a lot to it. And there's a lot to go over and sort of nuances in the campaign. And I also think going through the messaging is a great way to get an even better understanding of what the campaign is tonight, and as well as an opportunity to prepare you for future work, or for you to decide if you will be interested in getting involved with Subic Oil going forward. So first of all, I want to start off with this communications piece that you saw.
Dana?
Yeah.
Sorry, we can't, the screen shows it's loading on our end, at least on my end. I presume that's the case for everyone. Is that true?
Is it for me too? Yeah. It looked good at the beginning, but something is.
Yeah, when you went into presentation mode, it switched to loading.
Okay, sorry about that. Let me just see. Okay. And how about now? Can you see my screen?
For the moment, it still says loading.
Oh no.
Yeah, it's the same for me. Okay, how about now?
It's there.
Okay, great, awesome. All right, sorry about that. Okay, so this is something that you would have already seen Andrew talk about right here that goes along with the Subic Oil Declaration. And it's a good piece of communications to break down some points of the Subic Oil campaign. So it's the Let Subic Oil, and then it's we call on the government to do these 5 things. So it's a great thing to have on hand and to refer to as you might be getting involved and doing some work with Subic Oil going forward, which I hope you will be. So right away, it addresses what the issues are. So that fossil fuel use resulting in the extreme heat, wildfires, flooding, and other climate impacts, and that we're going to keep having those future impacts and issues, and then we need to call on government to help protect us from those further impacts. So right away, that it's stating clearly what those issues are. And then it's also providing that ask, what we're saying to decision makers. So in this case would be local governments. So we're calling on them to do 2 things: to set aside at least $1 per person towards a community fund to join this lawsuit, to actually work with those local governments to join the class action lawsuit, with that goal of recovering resources to pay for climate costs for what I mentioned before, for like the heat waves, wildfire flooding, and any other climate impacts. And then lastly, what we're building towards. There's that hopeful piece that what are we building towards with this campaign? What are we trying to get to? We're looking to, hopefully get those resources through lawsuit so we can cooperate with Indigenous people to work toward building a more equitable and sustainable society around things like transportation and housing and food, with that principle of putting people on the planet before corporate profits. So it's a really strong piece of communication material, and it's great to have on materials. Like if you have the declaration and you're using it like a petition and you're getting out in community, things that hopefully you'll be interested in doing if you want to join the Subic Oil campaign, as we're trying to build as much support by getting more people to sign on to the declaration. But it's also a lot if you're trying to do a pitch, if you're getting out in the field and you're actually speaking to people. Maybe you have that petition, maybe you're speaking to a friend about the campaign, or you're speaking to a group, or you're pitching it to a city councilor. So what we're going to talk about today is about using this information, as well as more Subic Oil campaign information, and turning it into a pitch that you can use to really be able to speak to anybody and to sort of sell anyone on this campaign and communicate what the values and the action that are happening in the Subic Oil campaign. So we're going to talk about some elements of campaign management messaging, and we're going to be using a structure that some of you might be familiar with to just work through the lots of messaging and lots of points that we have around the Subic Oil campaign. So this can be used for this campaign, but it could be used for any other action if you're interested, though we hope that you'll use it to get out and get involved in the coming months with the Subic Oil campaign. So there are 4 different elements within this structure for creating an ask for a campaign, a pitch for a campaign, using Subic Oil as an example. So we start out with the ask, the reason, what's at stake, and then the action. So the ask is nice and simple right off the bat. It should be a brief statement about what the issue is. So the example that I use is just one sentence. Subic Oil is holding major fossil fuel corporations accountable by calling on local government to join a class action lawsuit against them. So just one statement, nice and clear about boiling down to what the campaign is. Also just wanted to keep in mind that we are moving towards an exercise where I'm going to ask you all to use this structure to create your own pitch around the Subic Oil campaign. And you can also just pull from anything that interests you that Andrew said or that stood out to you, but just to give you some warning. So the reason is the second one. This is why the campaign is intended to achieve this, why this needs to change, or basically the reason behind the protest, the action, or the campaign. So why are we doing this campaign? When you go to write your own pitch, you can definitely put more than one sentence or one line like I did, an opportunity to flesh it out with the parts of the Subic Oil campaign that are interesting to you, that you would think would want to get other people involved in this campaign. So these corporations are profiting as our communities experience the effects of climate change, such as heat waves, forest fires, flooding, and etc. So number 3 is what's at stake. This is another good opportunity to flesh out with parts of the campaign that you think would inspire people to want to take action. So what will happen if we do not take action, if we are not heard, or if the proposed change or action does not happen? So this is an important time to create that sense of urgency. When we're doing a pitch, we want people to get involved. We want them to buy in, to want to be passionate about the issue. So this is a good chance to take that opportunity to create that urgency. And obviously when it comes to climate change and the effects that we're already seeing, there's a lot we can do there to create that urgency as it's already there. So the example is our local governments and therefore us are already paying for climate change, and these costs are only going to increase over time. And the last one is the action. So this is what the entire pitch has been pointing towards, what we're getting at, why we're having this conversation with somebody or with a group of people, or even if it's like a leaflet or a material that you might want to put a pitch on with a QR code or a link to the sign up for Subic Oil, so that you're giving it to people and they have a chance to read that and take the action. So whatever it is that you're leaning towards of what your ask is going to be for people. So what the campaign calls for the listener or the target audience to do in order to affect the proposed change. So what you're asking of the person that you're speaking to, how are they involved in this campaign? So we need your support to get municipalities across BC to join the lawsuit, sign the declaration to show your support. So in my example, we'd be asking somebody to sign the declaration, being that first level, that first step to get involved in the Subic Oil campaign is to sign on so you can learn more and get more involved. So just to go over those 4 again, as we will be using them for the activity. So it's the ask, which is just that brief statement, getting to the root of what the campaign is, the reason. So why are we doing this campaign? Just basically the reason behind it, which is a good opportunity to add, what's important to you about the campaign as well. What's at stake? What will happen if we do not act? A good opportunity to, talk about any of the climate effects that we've been experiencing, and the action. So what is the point of this? What are we asking the listener, the target audience to do? What is their role in this campaign or affecting the proposed change? So I'm just going to read the statement that I would use. So if I was out like in the field being active with the Subic Oil campaign, this might be something that first pitch that I give to somebody when I'm asking them to sign on to the declaration. And then we can always talk more about the campaign after. So I chose a more general one. So not a very hesitant one, not a very aggressive one that I would just use to speak to somebody if I didn't know what their background was at all. And I'm just wanting to convey the values and the action behind the Subic Oil campaign. So it's pretty bare bones. And if you do your own pitch, when you do your own pitch, you're welcome to make it longer and add more to it. So Subic Oil is holding major fossil fuel corporations accountable by calling on local governments to join a class action lawsuit against them. These corporations are profiting as our communities experience climate change impacts, such as heat waves, forest fires, and flooding. Our local governments, and therefore us, are already paying for climate change, and these costs are only going to increase. We need your support to get municipalities across British Columbia to join this lawsuit, sign the declaration to show your support. So nice and like brief way to talk to people about the campaign and to get them on board and let them know what you need from them and that first level, that first barrier of entry for them to get involved. So when you may be out, if you decide that you want to do anything, whether that be door knocking with Subic Oil, you want to table on a street in your community or go to an event, you want to bring it up at an all candidates debate or propose it. Maybe you're a member of a Council of Canadian chapter, you want to bring it back to the chapter. An important thing when you're working on your pitch, either today in your activity or just when you're working on a pitch in general around this campaign or any, is of course to think about your target audience. So I'm just going to go through what you might want to think about as you're writing your pitch in a moment. As well as just for developing any pitch. So you know your communities obviously better than anyone. So it's great to go through and ask these questions to yourself as you're working on a pitch. There's so much to cover when it comes to Subic Oil that we can have the opportunity to sort of pick things that might resonate more with some people than others. So number one being, has your community been directly affected by any climate impacts? So such as the wildfires, heat waves, or the heat dome, especially flooding or any other. So obviously, you know better than I whether your community has been affected or any surrounding communities. And this is a great thing to really highlight, as well as the specific impacts that your community may have endured as a result of these climate impacts. I'm going to be sharing in a moment a link to the Subic Oil messaging document. And there you can see a little bit more about some of the impacts that communities across British Columbia have experienced from climate change, including the heat dome. So does your community rely or believe they have to rely on the fossil fuel industry? So I think even if the answer is yes, if you're comfortable, it's still great to get out and talk about Subic Oil with these communities. You can just take a much less aggressive than you might in other spaces approach to this, especially if you're going to an event or you're speaking to someone whose background you don't know and could be related to the industry. I like to think about, because I've had conversations that are less supportive from people. I like to think about the fact of everyone having to pay their fair share as a good point when talking to these communities, about the fact that our communities are going to, if not already, pay the cost of climate change. So these industries should also pay their fair share. And that when it comes to local governments, there's not a lot of power for those local governments to hold something like fossil fuel industries responsible for their fair share of climate costs. Something like a class action lawsuit gives that power back to local governments to be able to stand up for their communities and get some of that funding back. So that can be, a talking point for anyone, but as well as somebody who, has less supportive feelings towards a campaign like this. So is the nature of your event that you are either attending, if you're attending events or organizing, or just the person that you're speaking to, more progressive or environmentally conscious? So this summer, Georgia Strait Alliance has been getting out with Subic Oil. We've been in communities all over the Lower Mainland, Richmond, Nanaimo, West Vancouver, East Vancouver, where we've been talking about Subic Oil. And we've been showing up to all sort of events where we may or may not know the background of people, including ones where there are much more progressive or environmentally conscious audiences. And we've noticed going really aggressive with the campaign and the messaging. So having a pitch that's more aggressive than we might at an event where we don't know people's backgrounds has done really well for us. We even had a summer position this summer who would literally just like kind of grab people as they were walking by and be like, do you hate the fossil fuel industry? You don't have to do that. I see Andrew's face, but it is an option, and it worked well for him in some spaces. I mean, obviously he was doing it in spaces where people would more support that message, but it grabbed people's attention. They got in, and people could really feel how we were holding people to account for their actions in this industry. And they could see that in the campaign, and people got excited about it, not just signing the declaration, but obviously we're looking for people to want to stay in tune with the campaign going forward, especially if we're going to do any organizing within their communities for a vote similar to the one that happened in Vancouver. And so the next point is about Vancouver. So you may have this experience too, if you get out in the community and talk to folks a lot, that sometimes people are a bit pessimistic and they'll look at any type of climate action and they think, okay, well, that's not going to work. I find talking about Vancouver is a really good idea for this. People are usually pleasantly surprised if they're a bit pessimistic about what the success is going to be of Subic Oil when we let them know that 2 months ago, this motion became before Vancouver City Council about a vote to join the class action lawsuit, and that Vancouver voted yes. And that often helps to get through that resistance from folks. But also you may be from a community that Vancouver being part of the campaign might make them less likely to want to join. So I'm sure you'll be aware if you're from a community like that, and that might not be something you would want to focus on in your pitch today, or if you choose to be more involved with Subic Oil in the future. The next is if you have a highly knowledgeable audience. So you may be an audience like this where people know a lot about climate change. They have a good understanding of strategy in the environmental movement. And they're maybe a bit more skeptical. Maybe you're going to be bringing this back to your Council of Canadians chapter or any other group. And that's when it's great to sort of lean on more of the resources on the Subic Oil website on the messaging page. It talks about the fact that this lawsuit isn't just about going and winning and bringing those resources back to the communities, as well as holding the fossil fuel industry accountable. It's about more than that, because people might bring up the fact that, you know, how much are we going to hurt the industry by this lawsuit? But the idea that Andrew also mentioned before is that if they're, you know, looking for funding or looking for to be insured, that the fact that they have a lawsuit against them is going to not be a point in their favor, and that these industries rely on that type of financial assistance and insurance and able to do what they do. So we're looking to make them a less attractive investor. And that type of point generally works for people who are more knowledgeable and have more understanding of sort of the strategy, environmental movement, to let them know about the nuances of the campaign. And the last is this audience, like a very environmental audience as well. They may have heard every environmental pitch out there. They may be a bit burnt out of hope. So for an example, over the weekend, Georgia Strait Alliance and West Coast Environmental Law was at a car-free day in East Vancouver. There were a lot of political organizations out, other charities, even environmental groups out as well. And if you are in a situation like that, especially when you know people are, you know, very familiar with different types of campaign work who are going to be there that day, like in East Vancouver, it's a great opportunity to focus on what's different about this campaign. People have heard it all. They lose sort of faith that we'll have success in this movement. So it's important to let them know, like, this is unique for Canada. This idea that we're going to sue, we're going to have cities join a class action lawsuit and sue the fossil fuel industry. This is new for us. This is a game changer. And this is something that we're very confident that we're going to be successful at. And letting them know that has had a positive outcome as well. So I know I've thrown a lot at you, but when you get to the activity, this is going to remain up. And also you be free to ask me any questions in the chat when we get there, but we'll take a break before we do. So the next I want to focus on when it comes to thinking about who you're speaking to is speaking with city councilors or candidates. I believe that some of you are going to be doing all candidates debates or plan on being active around the upcoming municipal elections in some way. Maybe you're just trying to get environmental actions to be talked about in your local city council elections or mayoral elections. And basically just talk about how you might create a pitch today in your activity, or if you want to talk about Subic Oil going forward in any work you're doing. So advice that I always give, though some of you have probably already heard this before, is that when you're approaching a city council candidate or an already elected person, to approach them with a collaborative nature, with the assumption that they want to do the right thing. They want to hear about the issue. They want to hear about the solution. They want to find a way to get it enacted. Unless, of course, you know otherwise and have a good idea of their voting record or where they might stand on an issue like this, to always sort of assume that they want to do the right thing. Another thing is to emphasize how this work, whether it's this campaign or any other, is different from the work the city is already doing, how it's unique from any current or proposed policy work. So you want to make that clear. Luckily, in this case, we're talking about a class action lawsuit towards the fossil fuel industries, a bunch of municipalities getting together. So it is unique. And you have that going for you, that when you're speaking, especially to people who've already been elected, you want to let them know that this is a game changer and this is something that's new. And also another big thing is to focus on the cost. If they are a city council candidate, especially if they've already been elected, they should know about the costs that we're already paying or are going to be paying in terms of adaptation for climate change and all those climate effects. So they will know, but it's important to emphasize that that $1 per resident is not going to be anywhere near the ballpark of what they're going to be paying as a city for adaptation. And that this is a way to bring that money back to the communities, protect our communities going forward as we deal with those effects of climate change. So it's always important to be clear and concise when you're speaking to a city council candidate or already elected person and provide them with that firm ask. So I'm just going to go back a little bit. So to the action piece. So for those of you who are going to be getting involved with any municipal action around the election and are interested in making Subic Oil or any other campaign an issue that you bring up, I think that this pitch is a good way to have that conversation, whether you're having a one-on-one conversation or you're going to an event where you have the opportunity to talk to a candidate and ask them to support this campaign. Specifically for those who are organizing or attending all candidates debate, I think it'd be make a great question in a debate or a question at the Q&A period that you have someone ask. So you can use the model that we went through today, the structure, to create that preamble of the campaign. And then when you get to the action piece, you can change it to make it fit for that city council candidate or their mayoral candidate. So if we're talking about candidates in Richmond, you could have that action piece be something like, we need your support to get Richmond to join this lawsuit. If elected, will you commit to vote yes when the motion to join the class action lawsuit Subic Oil comes before Richmond City Council? Or if they're a really awesome climate leader, you could ask them, will you bring this motion before your city council, if elected, to join the class action lawsuit for Subic Oil? It's always important to really try for that yes or that no, and to make that clear answer. Try not to give them as much space to wiggle out of it as possible. And if they say yes, to let them know that you will be following up with that commitment after the election, or just in general, if this is, a question that you ask later after the election has already happened. So I just wanted to go through some of the things, as I know some of you will be doing some work with the election, and it's a great opportunity to get those commitments, and so that people have that opportunity to show that they care about that accountability, the fossil fuel industry. They're worried about how to protect our communities going forward, to just hold them accountable after the election as walk around and have a vote in those local municipalities, hopefully, about whether or not they're going to join the Subic Oil campaign. So I've talked a lot, Andrew's talked a lot. It feels like less than me, but so I'm gonna give everybody a 5-minute break. So if you wanna keep your cameras, keep your microphones turned off, turn off your camera as well if you like, and just take 5 minutes. So we'd be coming back at 8:10. And also just want to note that we're going to be doing the activity when we come back. So if you don't want to do any typing, if you don't want to open a page up on your computer to do any typing, that during the break to get a pad of paper and a pen so that you can work through the activity. So we will see everybody back at 8:10 then. Okay, we're just going to come back then, and I'm just going to share my screen again. Can everybody see my screen? It's a Google Doc. Okay, great. So this Google Doc, Heel, could you share it into the chat for people? So this is for the exercise that we're going to be doing, where I asked you all to work through creating your own Subic oil pitch that can be used for multiple reasons. As I said before, it could be turned into a material. So it could be a leaflet that you could have a QR code or a link so people could go to the Subic oil website and sign up, with the ask being at the end to have them sign onto the Subic oil campaign to sign the declaration. It could also be the pitch if you were going to come back, if you're a member of a Council of Canadian chapter, to come back to your chapter and ask them all to sign the declaration or to get involved with the campaign, even a friend or family member asking them to sign. If you decide to get more involved in the campaign and maybe you want to do door knocking in your community, going to table at an event, something environmentally focused, or even like a community event like a farmer's market or something like that, where you may not know the backgrounds of those who are going to be showing up, or to have a conversation, a one-on-one conversation with a city council candidate, or as a question in a debate. So the idea is that when you do this activity, you're going to be working through your own Subic oil pitch, but you're going to be choosing who your audience is going to be. So you can see in this document, as I'm highlighting right here, that you choose your own, whether it's going to be, like I said, talking to someone in your community, at an event, council candidate, and that you pick what you want to focus on and to create your pitch based off of who you're speaking to. So I'm going to, when we go to the activity, I'm going to leave the slide up that talked about questions that you should ask yourself when you're thinking about who your audience is as you're working on a pitch. So that you can take a look at that, but that you also should all have access to this Google Doc in the chat. It's the Subic oil workshop activity, I believe is the name of it. You can't edit it, but if you want to open up another page or use your pen and paper to write down. So we have the structure here. So the idea is like the pitch that I did, that you'll go through the 4 parts. So the ask, the reason, what's at stake, and the action, and write your own pitch. And I have my example right below. Take as little or as much as you want from that. And then also we have the general Subic oil website, but right here, the first link is to the communications guide. Can everyone still see this? Yeah, okay. So this is the Subic oil messaging guide. So this is a great place to go to pull things for your own pitch that you might want to share. So they're nice and easily separated.
Dana, what? Yeah. We're still seeing the Google slide document. What are you asking them to link to? Maybe just me.
Yeah. Can people see the website that I just popped on, or are you still seeing the Google Doc?
The Google Doc.
Okay. There is a, okay.
You probably shared it to that screen. Oh.
How about now? Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is the Subic oil messaging doc, so that you'll use to write your own pitch for this activity. So you can talk about anything that stood out from you in Andrew's presentation or in mine. And also it's separated into different sections in case you want to pull from something that you think the target audience that you're choosing, or maybe just your community or you yourself would find interesting and motivating about the campaign. So the first is our communities are paying the cost of climate change. And then there's a bunch of different points you can pull from here. Big oil is profiting from causing climate change. There are more points here. And then the last one, we must make polluters pay their fair share through a class action lawsuit. And this just talks more about, why this campaign will be successful with other sort of similar process campaigns as well, or lawsuits as well. So you can go through that and pull out what is attractive to you, or if you are looking to have a more aggressive or a more sort of neutral take on the campaign. So if you have any questions about accessing the Google Doc, just put them in the chat and we'll get them to you. I just want to make sure you can see this new screen I'm on. So can you all see the slideshow again? Yeah, okay. So this is also written in the Google Doc, but just that you want to write your pitch going through each element of the structure, that you want to choose your target audience, speaking to a city councilor, or a friend, speaking to someone at a community event. So I'm going to give you 15 minutes to work on that. And then we're gonna put you all into small breakout groups after 15 minutes is up, where you will each have the opportunity to share if you want your pitch. So my pitch was about 40 seconds, but if you could aim for yours to be about a minute, then that would be great. Yeah, I'm just going to see if anyone has any questions, but I'll be around as you work through the activity in case you have any issues or any questions that you want to bring up. For where can we access this on your own time? Or if you're referring to the activity, like you'll have still have access to the Google Sheet, and then also that messaging document is available on the Subic Oil website. That's what it's linked to. So we're just gonna ask that you come back at, you'll be put into a group, sorry, at 8:33. So that's when you'll have an opportunity to share. So if you just want to keep your microphones off, turn off your camera if you like, and write through the activity and see if you can come up with your own pitch for Subic Oil. Thanks. So I hope everyone had an opportunity to work a bit through the pitch, and maybe you might want to use that resource later. It's a good way to get to know the campaign. There's a lot of nuances to it. I know you saw in the messaging document that there's a lot there. There's a lot to use as a resource and to talk about. So I wanted everyone to have an opportunity to really go through that document and to process it, as well as to talk a little bit about how I usually do pitches when I'm getting out and working in the field and talking to people and trying to build that support, whether in a city council or with just the general population around an issue or in a campaign. And it's always good to remember, especially myself, to remember that lots of people are going to connect with different things, and different things are going to inspire them and really make sense to them. So it's a good idea to not just get comfortable with one pitch once it starts working, but to think about your audience every time so that you can change it to suit them and to play around with what works. We've been doing that a lot this summer, and it's worked really well. We've gotten to see a lot of different talking points that are really strong. And if you're interested in talking to me more about that or anything that came up today, my contact information is above at Georgia Strait Alliance, as well as Heal, who's with me today, which is the other community organizer at Georgia Strait Alliance. So Andrew is going to talk in a moment about ways for you to get involved, brainstorming about ways you might want to get involved, tactics that I'm sure will be familiar to you, and ones that you might bring up that you might have done in the past in order to support Subic Oil. And hopefully the messaging that we talked about today is something that you can use when you're getting out and building that support. As right now, we're trying to build that around the election, as well as just building, getting more people to sign on to the declaration. So I'm going to pass things back to Andrew.
Okay, thanks everyone. I hope that was interesting. I'm just going to have a few slides about how groups have gotten involved so far, but really the challenge to you, I guess, is how you want to get involved. This is not, Subic Oil has never been branded to West Coast Environmental Law or to the Georgia Strait Alliance. The intention has always been that the groups that choose to participate can form this movement and can build the campaign. And so we very much are interested in partnering with people on implementing their ideas, which may not be what we necessarily came up with. I mean, so far we have had some people doing, as Dana mentioned, tabling. We've talked to groups that are intending to do door knocking and canvassing, and we're very much encouraging people to bring Subic Oil messages to demonstrations and rallies. Overall, our thinking of the trajectory has been that we would start the summer with building the Subic Oil movement. That's always going to be a continuing part of the work. That we would, during the elections, connect with candidates and really raise this as part of the local government elections, and then come October and November and thereafter, go back to the councils and trying to get that dollar per person and get them to start talking about bringing that class action lawsuit. Throughout all of this, the goal is to actually build that conventional wisdom that these companies will need to pay their fair share. And I think that if it's viewed just as a piece for lawyers, this is a missed opportunity. This is intended to be a piece for the climate movement, for communities that are facing the impacts of climate change, and wanted to actually have a conversation about climate change, not as something that is about polar bears or a political choice that politicians can make, but which is something about the tangible costs we face now and what are we going to do? How are we going to deal with that? So one of our partners is Shake Up the Establishment, which is a youth organization. We, in our early thinking, had this idea of Subic Oil house parties being sort of a social event that would allow us to spread the word to maybe non-usual suspects, where we are inviting supporters to host an event. Shake Up the Establishment was like, that's a great idea. We need like a party kit for our youth, that'll appeal to youth. And they've produced this, it's still in process, but they produced this party kit that has like sample menus and, including drinks menus and for both alcoholic or non-alcoholic options and playlists and, sample, social media advice on sharing about the Subic Oil house party on social media. And it's just been interesting to see this group embrace this idea and take it in a direction that we frankly had not thought of. And that's really our goal with this campaign. So the activity that we've got scheduled for you, we're down now, I think, to about 8 or so actual participants. So we could break you into 2 breakout groups, or we could just keep you all in the same group. I've got a Jamboard here. I'm not sure how many people have used Jamboards before. I'll actually switch what I'm sharing over to, I don't have it open yet. 1 second. Let's share over to the actual Jamboard. Is this one? And I will paste the link for this into the chat. I think we might as well just keep it in the same group. Yeah, sorry. Should have this all prepped. That is not it. Did not get it. Let's try that again. Okay, my problem is I'm having my Zoom screen thing is in the way of me seeing what I'm actually doing here. So let's try that again. Okay, copy link. There we go. Link copied. And put in chat. So everyone should be able to access that. When you're actually there, this is our brainstorm of some possible activities, and we're interested in which ones might interest you, but also do you have other ones? So you can physically grab one that interests you and put it over here for a discussion. You can talk about how they fit together. Maybe if you're going to be going to your local government to demand that they put aside $1 per resident. Where is that one? Here. Maybe first you're going to hold a public rally, or you're going to have a teach-in. And so like exploring how these relate, but also coming up with your own ideas. Maybe you want to do an art build and create some t-shirts or some placards for the rally, which have Subic Oil messages. Maybe you want to do something else that we haven't even thought of on and therefore isn't on this list. So if you follow that link that's in chat, you should get through to this page. And I'll just invite you to sort of read over those ideas. If you have any questions about them, please do let us know, or just ask, and we can discuss it. But I think we wanted to give you a bit of time to just talk about what might a local chapter do. Is it just helping sign up names by knocking door to door, or having an event? Is it having public events? Is it focusing on the litigation, or is it focusing on understanding what the local climate impacts are? And we're hoping that you, at the end of this session, if you feel comfortable sharing an idea that you would like to take back to your local chapter, or that you would like to be involved in some way. Yeah, any questions about that? People following the link, because I'm not seeing you show. Oh, maybe because I'm sharing the screen as opposed to being in the actual one. No, I'm not seeing you show up here yet. Or I'll stop the share, and then I'll know that's. If you click on the link in the chat, the Jamboard link, you should move over to, it should open up that page I was on.
Works for me.
Oh, no, this is interesting. So I'm seeing people, usually I can see how many people have joined, but I'm not seeing that, but I do see people are showing up. The little icons are showing up in a place I haven't seen. Okay, yeah, so I'll shut up. Please unmute yourselves and ask any questions, but also just talk about whether any of those resonate. Are those ideas that you would think is something your chapter might do? Are there ideas that aren't there that you'd like to see your chapter doing? I think I can probably unmute everybody and force you to talk that way. Yeah, Susan.
Well, I don't have a chapter, but a couple of things. I'm running for council in my town, and so we'll move this into my conversation somehow. I don't know exactly how yet, but I was working on the pitch. The other thing is that transition town in my town, Transition Souk, might be interested in moving this forward with the next council, whoever is on the next council. And I can see a number of those actions, would work where we are. So that's all.
Susan, I didn't mention that there is a candidates pledge that we're asking candidates to take. So that's something groups can be asking their candidates to do. We're going to send an email out on it shortly, but it's been more work than we've realized to assemble a full email list of candidates. Also there's a candidates backgrounder on the resources page that gives information on why it might be a good idea. This might be something that candidates might want to incorporate into their platforms.
Okay, great.
Although that will be updated shortly, because this.
Can I access the candidates pledge from your website?
You will be able to shortly.
Okay, great.
I mean, I can give you the link right now. It's subicoil.ca/get/candidates. I believe. Try that one. Oh, it didn't do HTTP.
Oh, there we go. Yeah.
It didn't make it as a hyperlink because it didn't have HTTP.
Let's see if it.
Try that.
Here we go. Great. Thank you.
Actually, if I share a screen, I guess we can all see collectively. I guess we can all see it if I just move over to that. does this resonate with folks? Is this or are there pieces that you'd like to see that aren't here? Yeah, Susan. You're still muted, hang on.
You're muted, Susan.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Good, okay. Luckily, I live in Vancouver, and so this is already, City Council's already voted to this campaign, so that's done. But I think that would be, for me, I would just talk to people I know, like later this month, I'll be celebrating my 80th birthday with my family. So I thought that would be an occasion in which I could talk about this and kind of make a pitch to them and have each of them in turn embrace this movement. So that's all.
Wonderful. Yeah, I really appreciate that. I do want to just clarify what Vancouver voted on was to put the $1 per resident into their draft budget. I'm told that means that it's probably going to be in the budget, that's not, that's 95% certain sort of thing. But they haven't taken a vote to actually proceed with the litigation. So there is still an ongoing need to do this. And there are a number of councillors who have taken a public position on that through the vote for the $1 per resident. Adrian Carr moved the motion, and we've also seen past motions that are similarly supported from Christine Boyle and Jean Swanson, and of course the mayor did vote in support of the motion. So I think making sure that those people feel the love for taking that position, and that they the candidates that are hostile to that do hear that people are concerned and want to see this lawsuit go ahead is still absolutely crucial in Vancouver.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that we're having an election very soon, a municipal election, and that we'll have more Green and One City candidates elected. So then we'll have more people, and Jean Swanson too. So anyway, I know Christine especially personally, so I can talk with her. But what I don't understand is this $1 thing. Is that they will put aside $1 per person, or are we going to pay? Are we going to be sort of quote taxed $1 each?
No, it's that they put aside $1 per person, and the idea is that this is the way municipalities can show that they're serious about this and identify which municipalities can be working together. They're not going to be hiring us; they're going to be hiring private lawyers who specialize in class action lawsuits.
Yes.
So there are going to be some costs involved in doing this,
Yes.
and so that $1 per resident seemed manageable, and something we could ask every community to do. And where it comes from, it could come either from existing revenues, or they could decide to increase taxes to cover that difference. But as has been said, that cost is infinitesimal compared to the actual costs of climate change that communities are facing. So it's an ask we feel fairly good about. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah.
Hi, Wes. Yeah.
Hi. So I came in quite late, and so I posted in Kelowna, and I mentioned to the mayor a couple of Zooms ago, I don't know, a month, probably 2 months ago. He was sitting on the across from City Hall next to the beach, So I mentioned to him that that you had the Zoom call, and so he said good, and all of that. But so I'm incorporating it in my talk as I go around all over the place to talk to everybody and their dog about. Well, I'm working on proportional representation because in my mind that touches every issue. But I'm talking to people in general. Obviously, we've got the city election, working on that with a number of councillors, as well as we formed a group called Livable Kelowna, of all things. And so that's an interesting group that's going to question all the candidates. And we've got candidates from here to China in numbers, and then pick 5 and that. So I had just raised the issue sort of here and there with people as it came up or in conversation or whatever else. So that's what I've been doing. Our chapter is me basically on this, and other people I'm sure are on board, but that's what I've got to say.
And we certainly appreciate you taking the posters, Wes, and talking to people there. I mean, I will mention that I think that there was a question in the chat about how to, can this be used as a way to win elections? And I believe it can be, but there's a lot of, there's a lot of candidates that are leery about it as well. We know that if it's framed the wrong way, that people don't resonate with it. And it's framed in terms of recovering a fair share, and ask, being able to actually ask, like, so are you saying that taxpayers should pay 100% of these costs? Because that's what's happening now. Shouldn't the industry pay its fair share? That's actually a fairly powerful message. But I do. The point being, I think that's something to think about how to raise with candidates and with in the election. Sorry, Richard, I interrupted. Go ahead.
I just had a question. You mentioned there was a PowerPoint on this Subic Oil, and my thought is if our chapter decides to go ahead with doing this, at some point we might want to do a presentation to City Council. Now we usually have about tops 5 minutes for any presentations. I just wonder how long the PowerPoint is, or is there a kind of a short one that would hit all the points that?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah.
The one that so there's a group in the Sea to Sky region that's specifically interested in having a training PowerPoint, and that's the one that I was referring to, and it would be a longer PowerPoint. We've done pitches on, if not exactly this ask, the sort of related ask to asks to local governments before, and had a video that was, a PowerPoint that was down to 5 minutes. I could dust that off fairly easily and adapt it to to Subic Oil. So I think we could help make something like that relatively quickly, but it's not something I have on my shelf.
No, and it wouldn't be, I wouldn't envision it would be until later this year if we go ahead anyways, or early next year. But thanks for that, because I think that's what we'd want to use. Yeah.
Sorry, which chapter are you?
Oh, Campbell River Council Canadians.
Right. Thanks. Well, we're coming up to the hour, and I appreciate you all hanging on with us till the end. I also know that there were some questions posted in the chat that I didn't answer, and I'm happy to, I know some of the people who asked them have left. I'm happy to stay on for a few more minutes if people have questions that they didn't feel were answered or would like to see, hear the answers to anything that was in the chat. But I do think we should probably say thank you and let people go if they have other commitments. So thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
And
thank you.
Yeah, feel free to unmute and ask a question or anything if you want to do so. And Susan, we should be in touch as well, I would think.
Thanks very much to you, Andrew, and to you, Dana. We really appreciate you sharing your time and your expertise with us tonight.
Well, thank you for having us. We appreciate you and your time and all of the work, the hard work the Council of Canadians does. Great.
So hi, David. Officially, I've seen you through emails, so it's good to see your face. And obviously, we'll connect. I'm getting my e-bike in about 5 to 10 days in Vancouver, so I'm going to pop down and maybe we can chat or something. But good to see you. And obviously, this is a serious issue. Out of my 5 points, the climate crisis is #1, together with the gap between the rich and poor, besides the voting change and obviously the pandemic. And I'm Ukrainian, or 3/4. So what's going on there is just, the worst on the worst.